everybody, I'm back with the second half of the money puzzle with Rocco Million. Okay, so where I left off was talking about how our federal government targets the natural rate of unemployment, usually around 5% unemployment, forcing millions of people to be unemployed as a buffer stock against inflation. Because, unemployed people can't afford the demand supply that we don't have, which causes inflation. So I think that's pretty sadistic. That isn't what America is all about. America is supposed to be freedom and opportunity for all. If you work hard, you're supposed to have a good life in this country. And yet, even if every worker had the best job skills and the most education and all the responsibility in the world, it wouldn't make a difference because our federal government, the currency issuer, targets 5% unemployment. So when we get a hot economy like they call it right now, we're under that artificial rate of unemployment. So they say that our economy's overheating and needs to be slowed down to curb demand and control inflation. Even though, the majority of Americans need credit cards just to survive. That's not an overheating economy. Millions of people are unemployed across America. That's not full employment. 64% of Americans can't even afford to open a savings account. And you're telling me we have an overheating economy where too many Americans are working and got too much money to demand too much supply that we don't have, bidding up prices and causing inflation? That's what you're saying is happening? No, that's not what's happening. Our government, if we wanted to control inflation because it was a real problem, they could cap prices directly. Right now, whenever they say inflation is a problem, this is what capitalism is all about. This is what everyone wants. You want your company to be able to have pricing power and to be able to jack up prices arbitrarily, far above the cost of production, just for profit's sake, because that's what's going to return more money to shareholders. So that's what you want. But that isn't how you build a sustainable economy. Now, personal liberty means we have the freedom to, have a business or have economic security. But that economic security, our business, can't come at the expense of the general welfare and common defense. If your business, say, pollutes the river, you have no right to that business. Our government has every right to pick winners and losers based on who's good for the general welfare and common defense. So people complaining about these green policies that are designed for sustainability. We got to get off of this obsolete and toxic fossil fuel, and they're saying that's not the government's job. Well, what's the government's job? Of course it's the government's job. Government is tasked with making the money and providing for the general welfare and common defense. Allowing your population to be poisoned with obsolete and toxic technology does not provide for the common defense and general welfare of anything. That's common sense. Of course, these oligarchs and fossil fuels, they've captured our government for decades with all of their ill-gotten gains, unearned income. They'll capture our government, they bribe them, and they subvert what's best for America, which would have been EVs and green sustainable energy decades ago. But our government and, at the behest of oligarchy, spent big money to suppress any science and technologies that were better than the status quo, to protect the oligarchs' monopoly rights and pricing power for fossil fuels. We based our whole economy on it. Yeah, we don't have to be completely dependent on it. That's just how we based it. We could have made products out of marijuana, out of hemp, hempcrete, biodegradable plastic. There's all kinds of stuff we could do that's sustainable and green and to form symbiotic relationships with the physical world in which we live. But that's not a priority. What's a priority is short-term profits for shareholders and for capitalists. So this is what we got to do. So our government is literally forcing millions of people to be unemployed with its policy. As we see right now, it's tightening to slow the economy, to curb demand. That means take our money away. It's saying, so when they say we're trying to do it just right to create this soft landing so that we don't create unemployment, call BS. Because the whole point, they specifically designed this policy to tighten the economy and curb demand, specifically to create more unemployed people who can't afford the demand supply we don't have and bid up prices, causing inflation. That's what it's about. And then the unemployed get so desperate they work for less and less, and that drives down everybody else's wages and working conditions. So that keeps the majority from having too much money to demand supply we don't have. Now, this is completely unnecessary and sadistic. It's undemocratic. Our government should be offering living wages and training to anybody willing to work, because it's in our best interest to have people working and gainfully employed instead of unemployed and desperate and financially insecure. That's common sense. So, like, even take me for example. Mom, I'm making a live stream. So take me for example. I'm a disabled veteran, and I'm unemployable in the private sector, the government says, but in reality, the private sector, I'm unemployable because they need profit. They can't make their own dollars. They operate by making a profit, and I would cost them profit because I can't do everything a healthy person can do. But the government, it never needs profit. It doesn't even need income. It makes its own money to provide for society in perpetuity. So it's in government's best interest to design a job around my disability. So that, when I feel good, when I feel up to it, I can go work. I can go sit with old people, help them live safe. I can raise their standard of living. And then I'd be contributing to society and working instead of not working. That creates better citizens. It gives us skin in the game. It helps people have compassion. And when you're not struggling and forced to be a criminal to survive, that creates better citizens. When you have a legal job and you could create a legal income to feed your family, and you got upwards mobility if you work hard to get even better paying jobs in the private sector, you're not going to be risking your income and your reputation, to be a criminal. You're not going to be rioting in the streets. You're not going to be stealing and selling drugs. There's always an exception to the rule, but for the most part, when this is stuff that happens when people have no other choice. Think about it. I know we're all taught to believe that, criminals and the unemployed are that way because they did something wrong or they're some personal failing, but nobody wants to be unemployed or homeless or addicted or in a gang. These are situations that people had to do to adapt and overcome the rigged economy in which they found themselves. And when we systematically abuse so many people with this involuntary unemployment or the starvation wages that it creates, we're forcing millions of people to be unemployed or working poor no matter what they do. And so when you got no hope for a better tomorrow, and no matter how hard you work, you're not going to be able to feed your family, it would be irresponsible not to go commit crimes to get the money you need and feed your family. So that's what people do. They either get credit or crime to supplement their meager starvation wages so that they can feed their family and survive. It's not immoral. It's not a choice. That people have to survive. If you want domestic tranquility, you want a safe society, you got to give everybody freedom and opportunity. And that means starvation wages and involuntary unemployment shouldn't exist. Especially when our country's literally crumbling in need of work and everybody's crying about inflation and we can't increase our supply. That's because unemployment it's counterproductive. Our government, after the pandemic downturn, our government stepped in with extraordinary fiscal supports to save America from the pandemic. And that boosted demand. So the private sector employers, they had to hire more workers to increase production and make more goods and services to satisfy the increased demand for those goods and services. But the private employers were telling us they couldn't even find good workers. And that's despite, our government forcing millions to be unemployed at all times. Why is that? That's because simply unemployment sees good work habits and job skills atrophy. Everybody knows that it's almost impossible to get a good job when you're unemployed. It's way easier when even you got the crappiest job. If you're working, it's a lot easier to get a job. So it would be so much better and more productive for our country to, instead of maintaining these armies of unemployed people all over the place who then, bid each other's wages down, creating starvation wages for the majority of other workers. Instead of all that, it would be better for our government to offer living wages and training to anyone willing to work, to target true full employment with the federally guaranteed living wage job program. Then our government can increase production and supply of whatever we needed to control inflation while raising living standards in the process. That's how you strive for a more perfect union. That's how you ensure domestic tranquility. That's how you provide for your common defense and general welfare, not by forcing millions to be unemployed as a permanent buffer stock for inflation against inflation for the rest of us. That ensures we always got millions of desperate people, and that makes everybody unsafe. Eventually, all these people that work hard, they look around and they see the people that don't work. Everyone thinks it's the welfare people that are the leeches. No, those are the biggest victims of class war. The biggest parasites are at the very top, the top 1% of society. And it's unsustainable when everybody wants to be in the non-working class at the top 1% of society, living off of unearned income and feudal monopoly rights, because then nobody's left to make the stuff that your money buys. So we have to incentivize working over not working. We have to incentivize earned income over unearned income. We have to incentivize productive behaviors and activities over unproductive or parasitic behaviors and activities. This is not rocket science. I mean, a lot of this stuff was, was known. It was just lost to us. That's why, modern monetary theory, MMT, it's not the right wording for what we're talking about, because this isn't new. The theory has been around from the beginning of time. If you look at some of Michael Hudson's writings, he talks about, debt in a completely different way that no one really thinks about. The debt jubilee was part of the Old Testament. It was right in the Bible. I never knew that. Leviticus 25, and it talks about a debt jubilee. This is about the society would come together every so often when debtors couldn't pay their debts. They would cancel the debts because otherwise the creditors would destroy the economy. All right, because when everybody's paying, debt, they're paying people to do nothing, unproductive stuff, lend you money. That doesn't build anything. So when you're paying all your money to them people, you got no money left over to spend in the real economy, demanding and guaranteeing the real jobs of the skilled and educated above. So it ends up hollowing out your economy like we see right now. But all this information was lost to us really after the 60s and the civil rights movements. We really see a concerted effort to defund and, kill our public education system. Because an educated populace would never accept what's going on. How do you get even good people to not blink an eye when our government's forcing millions to be unemployed or working poor at all times? I tell people this and they don't even believe me. Now people can't deny it. It's all on, no one can miss it. The government is tightening the economy to slow it down, to curb demand and control inflation. That literally means it needs to take demand away. It needs to raise unemployment. So when it says it's looking for a soft landing without creating unemployment, it's BS. They're looking to create more unemployed and working poor people who can't demand supply we don't have and cause inflation, thereby forcing a segment of society to always be poor, unemployed, financially precarious. That's not how you ensure domestic tranquility. That's not freedom and opportunity for all. They want us all desperate so that we can't unite in solidarity and force good public policy that actually helps everybody. They want us, they inject this class antagonism. They want, your mother who is a nurse, works hard every day, and she's always precarious. They want her to be mad at Rocco. He doesn't work, and he got money because he got a lot of money now because he's trading on the market. He makes unearned income. Why is it okay for him to make all that money sitting on his butt while I, am busting my ass as a nurse every day? So it makes us fight against each other instead of really focusing on the economic terrorists, the oligarchs, who buy and threaten our public servants, our lawmakers, to subvert what's best for America, like full employment and living wages, strong public services. Because actually, America needs populations of educated, healthy, protected, and gainfully employed workers. We never need oligarchs or private monopoly. And that's stuff you don't need. All right, this is all common sense stuff. And our government always has the money to provision itself with the things it needs. That's why it has the power of the purse, per the Constitution. So it could create as many dollars as it needs to satisfy the tax debts that are out there. It could always achieve true full employment. The government can always make dollars to hire anybody that wants to work to achieve full employment. That's the only way they could achieve it. The private sector would never even want full employment because, again, with full employment, they got to bid wages up. They want to minimize the cost of labor to maximize their profits. So they need government to keep forcing millions to be unemployed so that these millions are so desperate that they bid against each other, bidding wages down just to get work. So they're willing to work for less and less. That's how they minimize the cost of labor. That's how, McDonald's is able to hire people. And even though McDonald's is more profitable than ever before, the workers that created those profits will never see a dime. Because why would the bosses give them anymore? They know there's a million people outside that'll do their job cheaper. They're unemployed and desperate for work. So that's how it works. If the government was standing by giving everyone living wage jobs that do needed work, first of all, we'd be rebuilding our communities in green, sustainable ways that raise everybody's living standards. But now I forget my point. See, that's the problem. I'm not an expert, I'm trying to do the best I can because this is what we got to do as a people. We all have to participate in our democracy or else it doesn't even work. We could have the best rights in the world. If we don't collectively demand them, we're not going to get them. We're going to get fascism every time, like we see today. Our government could be hiring and training anybody willing to work to rebuild our crumbling community and increase the production and supply of whatever we need to control inflation while raising living standards in the process. It simply chooses not to because the biggest donors don't want full employment. They don't want a land of plenty. They would rather have, millions unemployed so that they don't got to pay fair wages, so that they can maximize their profits. They don't want full productive capacity. They don't want everybody's base needs met. They want to be able to monopolize healthcare and education and infrastructure of all kinds. They don't give America be damned. They don't care if we're losing our standing in the world. This is the thing. And we did this. Our government has done all this from the 70s. They hollowed out our productive capacity with fiscal austerity, targeting unemployment, cutting and privatizing essential public goods and services. They thought they could hollow us out like this forever. They didn't care if we ended up with populations of unhealthy, uneducated, unprotected, and unemployed people all over the place because they thought we could always rely on cheap imports with our trade deficit from the rest of the world. But now globalization's come to a crashing halt because, COVID, it revealed, it exposed, globalism for what it really is, a neoliberal class war perpetrated against the 90%. For the 1%. So yeah, now with with the COVID, supply lines in China get shut down. They have a zero tolerance policy. So now our biggest the biggest exporter in the world is shut down. So now we can't get those cheap imports. So now there's not enough goods and services around. So the rich get scared and they start buying up all the supplies they can, and they bid up prices in the process, and that's what causes your inflation. But instead of the government making price caps against, overpriced Teslas, or, price caps against things, and telling people they can't hoard or price gouge, instead of all that, our government makes the most vulnerable pay the price with unemployment and being working poor. We control inflation by forcing millions to be unemployed or working poor because they can't afford to demand goods we don't have and cause inflation. That's sick. Why don't we ask the richest people to pay the price for inflation? We should cap the price of goods and services if it's hurting the economy, to let them be gouged up. All right? Businesses only exist because we have a government and a general welfare. If your business can't help the general welfare and common defense, it shouldn't exist. You shouldn't be allowed to hurt our society. And if inflation hurts our society, then we should cap the prices, or we should stop people from hoarding. We shouldn't force millions of people to always be unemployed or poor so they can't afford to demand supplies that we don't have and cause inflation. That's undemocratic, it's counterproductive, and it's unnecessary. Our government can always hire and train anybody that wants to work. And we can at least try to increase production and supply of whatever we need. There's a reason why China's whooping us. And it's because it's way more efficient for the currency issuer to spend and provision what needs provisioned than it is to leave it up to the private sector, who only does anything for profit. That's always going to not be as good of a way. I'm not saying we got to get rid of the private sector or capitalism either. I'm not advocating for socialism. Socialism is when the government takes over every business. Socialism doesn't have a private sector, okay? I like my private property. I want a private sector. I like market economy too. So I'm for capitalism. But you can't have a capitalist society without consumers, without a healthy working class. The only thing a capitalist society truly needs is a government and labor and consumers. You don't need oligarchs. You don't need private monopolies. You don't even need private owners. But I like private owners, to a point. There's a difference between owning your own property or even owning an apartment building. And, that's personal property. And there's a big difference between that and owning 100 apartment buildings. That's a huge difference. So these are the things we need to start to understand. And we can't, it's not that people are jealous of the rich. It's that people, aren't surviving at the bottom. People are suffering and dying for no reason. Why should people suffer and die in pain or, with medical conditions simply because they don't got the money to pay? That's rationing. That's a death panel right there. It's ration for money, our health care and our meds. We can have cheaper meds. We pay more for our health care and get less than the rest of the world. We used to have the best health care in the entire world when it was public health care. That's how we built the middle class. That's how we beat the Axis powers. Our government deficit spent investing into itself to build its own productive capacity with healthy, educated, protected, and gainfully employed people using direct federal employment programs targeting full employment, investing in top-notch public health care, top-notch public education, top-notch public infrastructure of all kinds. That's why government exists, is to serve the public welfare, all right, so that the country can exist in perpetuity. We don't have a government and public money so that they can get the few insanely rich while the majority suffer, while America crumbles needlessly. That's not why government and money exists. And I'm not, look at China. They're doing way better than us, and they still got rich people. They still got a capitalist economy. They still got a private sector. People still have their own property in China. It's just they don't let any one person monopolize what China needs. China puts its public interest first and foremost, and then you let the individual make what they can from the balanced economy that bottom-up planning creates. Government is never supposed to work for the individual and force society to make do with the scraps. That's fascism. That's always fascism. Okay, so that's where we're at. Our government, when they tighten like this, they're saying too many of us too many Americans are working and have too much money, and we're demanding too many goods and services, jacking up prices, causing inflation concerns. So instead of capping prices or stopping people from hoarding like they did during the pandemic, with people trying to profit from, personal protective equipment. Instead of doing that now, which we should, they just let people monopolize everything. We should do that now because we're facing an existential threat like we never faced before. Forget COVID. We're facing ecological and climate disaster on a scale that nobody has ever seen before. This is an imminent threat to America. This is national security. That's how Biden can use the Defense Production Act. And he needs to use it. He only made, basically, he didn't even use it. He suggested that the companies do it. He needs to use it directly to make these companies increase production of what needs produced so that we can meet our country's needs and exist in perpetuity, with freedom and opportunity for all. That the freedom isn't just a natural thing that you could find out in the woods and dig up.